Hi. In international trade, or let's say in world economy, we discussed on the organizations that are involved in international trade. Now, today, the expectation is to get a brief explanations about all these organizations which are relevant for the international trade and marketing. Right. So in this lesson, there are two outcomes known as identify and understand the role of organizations involved in international businesses, as well as to evaluate the usefulness of them in international trade. So these are the things we are expecting to cover today. And moving to especially to the organizations which are involved in international trades, it's obvious there are four organizations that we are going to discuss today, right? But here I've included one which is only relevant for the Asian countries, that is known as Asian Development Banks, which are not relevant for any examinations conducted by the Scottish Qualification Authority, right? Because Scotland is not going to deal with ADB because ADB is just only for the Asian countries, right? Other than that, there are three organizations that I'm going to discuss. The first one is the World Trade Organizations known as WTO, the World Bank, and International Monetary Fund known as IMF, you may have heard of. Right, moving to the lesson, we'll go with the presentation because these are organizations, right? These are not practical scenarios. So because of that, it's better to go with the presentations, whatever that I've mentioned in the presentation, and we'll get the brief explanation about them. Right, moving to the World Trade Organization, look at the presentation. We say it's an intergovernmental organization. What do you mean by an intergovernmental organization? When it comes to the foreign trade, it's obvious that two countries or more countries are involved in making their contracts, agreements, and do deal with foreign trade, right? So to observe or to monitor and to evaluate these operations, there should be an organization to deal in intergovernmental, let's say between the governments, that is called intergovernmental. So that is why we call it as an intergovernmental organization. And the purpose of the existence of the institution is to reduction or to reduce the tariffs, right? We discussed about the tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers during our previous lessons, and we got to know there are so many restrictions that are implemented by the different sort of countries based on the different trades available from them. Now, when it comes to the WTO is there for reduction of the tariffs and taxes between the countries, where to make sure that all the countries are similarly satisfied with their international trade, right? Then basically deals with co-agreements which are negotiated, signed, and ratified by the most of the world trading nations. Now, between the nations, it's obvious that there are so many types of agreements exist, and according to the agreements, they behave their or they conduct their business deals. Now, WTO actually observes and monitors and governs all these agreements, as well as they're having some negotiation terms, almost negotiated, and they have agreed with some of the terms and conditions, right? It's up to the WTO to, let's say, examine and to ensure the practices of all these organizations, or let's say the economies as a whole. Then moving to the next slide, we can see General Agreement on Tariff and Trades, known as GATT. Make sure this is not a, simply understand this. This is not a separate organization. It's an organization, or let's say an agreement or a section which is located in the WTO itself, right? Let's get to know about that. So, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades was established in 1947 as to govern the non-discrimination, transparent procedures, and the settlement of the disputes between the international countries, or let's say the international regions, right? And according to the second point, an institution that sponsored successive round of international trade negotiations with key focus of reduction of prevailing high tariffs. So I told you in WTO, the basic intention was to reduce the tariffs. So to govern that, they have appointed another body called a GATT, that is General Agreement on Tariff and Trades. They evaluate, they concentrate on whatever the tariffs and taxes which are imposed on the governments, intergovernmental agreements, and they make the arrangements to reduce them further to make favorable circumstances, or let's say the favorable surroundings to the people those who are involving in the international trade. Clear? Fine. Then, moving to the next slide, it's further negotiated with all these rounds. Have you ever heard the term called rounds? There are so many types of conferences between these countries. When it comes to the international organizations, the round is called a conference, right? Especially when it comes to Kennedy round, the Tokyo rounds, those are the conferences held on the international trade, and through them, GATT made some of the let's say mechanisms to further reduction of tariffs and taxes in international trade between the countries, as well as made some of the better provisions in dealing with subsidies. And also, they made some mechanisms to evaluate, monitor, and to omit some of the trade disputes between the agreements, which can possibly happens when do you have maintain the trade agreements between the countries. And being responsible for all these matters, GATT uh, rules some of the other sub-organizations as well. Because when it comes to GATT, it was established in 1947, and GATT, before GATT came into the scenario, there were so many organizations, or let's say so many sections governing some of the activities attached to the World Trade Organization, WTO, right? So the sections, whichever were there, are coming today under the GATT, because GATT is the governing body of all these things, because it's the major partner, or let's say major section of WTO to govern all these taxes and tariff reductions. So under GATT, you can see, it's, as it is mentioned in this slide, General Agreements on Trading Service, known as GATTs, is inside it, and trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. Why do you need to concern about these intellectual properties? Because there can be so many disputes happen. So many disputes can be happen between the nation due to the intellectual properties, right? So because of that, there's another sub-organization called, or sub-agreement arrangement called TRIPS, right? And when it comes to trade-related measures, we call them as TRIMs, right? There are so many measurements, or let's say some of the measures involved in monitoring and evaluating and complying the requirements and procedures of this international trade. So all these things are coming under the trade-related measures and known as TRIMs, right? And fine. Then it comes to agreements covered by GATT. It's as a summary, we can see general agreements on trade services, agreements on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, and trade-related measures known as TRIMs are there. By the way, I forgot to tell you that intellectual property rights. What do you mean by intellectual properties? It can be your trade name, it can be your trademark, it can be your composition of your, let's say if it's a compound, or let's say if it's a sort of a product which contains some of the ingredients, it can be your structure of ingredients, or it can be even the structure of the product, right? All these things are coming under the intellectual property rights, intellectual property, right? Let's suppose that if there's a trademark or a trade name, so nobody can copy it and paste it as they want, because there are some of the regulatory backgrounds to them. So you can make some of the what you call the legal actions against them, and you can sue all the parties. Right. So moving to the World Bank, the second organization which we encounter in this international trade is the bank which recognized globally, or let's call it as the international financial institution in the world, right? And the purpose of the World Bank is to facilitate the countries through giving some financial benefits. Let's call them as loans, right? To do this, there are two parties involved with the World Bank, known as IBRD and IDA. If you can remember, recently with this Corona COVID-19 incidents, World Bank has donated some of the rupees, or let's say dollar value to Sri Lankan government, and these two parties were involved with that, especially the second party known as IDA. Right. Moving to that, the first party who's involved in this World Bank is International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. That is one of the, as I was mentioning during the previous slides in World Trade Organization, this is like IBRD is one of the parts in the World Bank itself. These are not different types of organizations, right? So IBRD is located in World Bank itself. It's a different sort of a unit, right? Then the second one is International Development Association, right? In 1994, this World Bank began its operation just after the World War, right? To make the some of the what do you call the financial rehabilitations, right? Then coming back to the slide, the bank has made major efforts to assist the fledgling economies to participate in modern economic trade framework. Now, without funding, can you assume a country to become an international market? No. Because to become an international market, they need more funds to be utilized to promote them as a country which is involved with the international trade, right? So World Bank facilitates for them as well. They are helping out you through becoming an international or becoming a country to deal with international trade. Right. So World Bank is not a single organization. It has two different types of, as I told you earlier, there are two subsets of it known as IBRD and IDA. And when it comes to the members, let's say World Bank is a group. We call it as a World Bank group, right? In World Bank group, there are so many organizations in it, right? When it comes to the World Bank group, we can see International Financial Corporation, International Development Association, as I told you, IDA, a Multivariate Investment Guarantee Agency known as MIGA, and International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. These are the organizations which are in the World Bank group, right? You can Google it and see, right? So coming to the first, or let's say one of the agencies or one of the organizations which are located in the World Bank itself, we can call it as IFC, known as International Finance Corporation. So that plays a role of investment banker. IFC is the investment banker of the World Bank, which encourage and facilitates of assuring the growth of productive enterprises, let's say. Especially, it takes the securities in the form of stock or bonds, or let's say, it can be either equity ownership or else the bonds or the debt ownership, right? So, that is the nature of IFC. Coming to the IDA, that is known as International Development Association, that is the, let's call them as the soft loan section of this World Bank, right? That produces or that provides soft loans to the nation, those who are engaged in this international trade, right? And also that distributes and that allocates. IDA allocates World Bank, the World Bank group staff, as well as the resources, let's say the credits, to the countries and make sure that the countries are developing in their international trade activities. Then determination of which countries to qualify as to get the loans. I told you they are providing credit facilities plus the staff. To get the credit facilities from World Bank, IDA is the central body to decide on under which circumstance and for which countries that the loans to be given. They are deciding on this based on the per capita income of that particular country. Right? There are so many layers, so many levels where you can, draw the loans according to the governments, right? Right. Moving to the ICSID, known as International Center for Settlements of Investment Disputes. I told you there's a possibility of having investment disputes, right? Industry disputes. Now, ICSID facilitates for settlements by conciliation or arbitration of investment disputes between the foreign investors and their host countries. That is the role of ICSID. And as I mentioned you in the first slide, there's a bank called ADB, or known as Asian Development Bank, which is not relevant for your SQA examinations. But of course, get to know about this organization will add an advantage for you in writing for another examinations as well, right? So that is why I've thought of, get these things involved in my lesson. So ADB is a regional bank which is located for the funding and to formulate and govern some of the monetary facts in Asian countries. Especially this was established in 1966 and facilitates economic development of the countries in Asia. Right. The basic or the major role of ADB is to lend funds to their countries, the associative countries. And moving to the International Monetary Fund, it's a different organization and it's common for the whole world, right? It's not limited to a particular or restricted to a particular territory or a country. IMF is the global monetary corporation, right? And it has 189 countries involved in it, and all these are members of IMF. The IMF's role is to secure the financial stability in the countries, facilitate international trade, promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, and as well as to reduce the poverty around the world. So these are the intentions of IMF, right? Okay, so when it comes to the role of IMF, that works as a surveillance body to govern and to monitor the member country exchange rate policies. I told you 189 countries are members of this IMF. So to govern and monitor all these exchange rate policies, the IMF is getting involved, right? They will evaluate the depth and the performance of the economic policies, as well as the world economic outlook, and periodic discussions on exchange rate developments will be held by or will be conducted by the IMF. And it contributes to the policy coordination among the major industrial countries. Okay, so those are the things that we decided to discuss today. And from our next lesson, we are expecting to discuss about these trade agreements between the countries and the nature of them. So thank you very much for watching this video. Have a good day. Thank you.